Israel's military campaign may have stopped, but its rebranding campaign is just getting started.
هذا هو ما يحدث الآن في غزة.
After killing nearly 68,000 people in Gaza and flattening almost the entire strip, Tel Aviv and its Western allies are suddenly talking about peace, rebuilding, and moving on. But is this really peace or a PR cleanup? Over the last 2 years, Israel has killed more than 67,900 Palestinians and injured over 170,000 in Gaza. Nearly all of Gaza's homes, 92% of residential structures have been destroyed or damaged. A United Nations Commission, multiple rights groups, and countless humanitarian bodies have labeled these actions as genocide. Yet as the ceasefire takes hold, Israeli leaders are rewriting the story.
Well, I would frame it in the following way. This is very much about empire management or facilitating the United States and the West's geopolitical interests in the Middle East. What's clearly evident when you listen to Donald Trump speak about his 20-point peace plan for Gaza, specifically his speech in the Israeli Knesset last Monday, it's very much framed and presented as the continuation of the Abraham Accords, which was this deal that Donald Trump, proposed and organized between Israel and several Arab states in 2020. All of them, of course, dictatorships. And this is very much part of a grand vision that the United States has for the future of the Middle East, that they believe, that the United States believes, will bring peace and prosperity to the region. And so that's really the key context here, that Israel and the Arab states, if they can come together and put aside their differences, we can have peace and stability in the Middle East. But of course, when the 2020 Abraham Accords were announced, between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, and then later Bahrain and a few other countries joined as well, the question of Palestine was completely ignored. There was a belief that it didn't matter anymore, that the question of Palestine didn't matter to the region, didn't matter to the world, and so you could go ahead and have this wonderful peace agreement, ignoring the question of Palestine. But then October the 7th happened, and now the question of Palestine is at the top of the agenda. And then this Abraham Accords were stuck in paralysis. There was no way the Abraham Accords could go forward, and specifically, there was no way that Saudi Arabia could join the Abraham Accords when there was a genocide happening in Gaza. It would be political suicide for any Arab or Muslim leader to sign on to the Abraham Accords, to establish close relations with Israel, and to shake Benjamin Netanyahu's hand when there was a certifiable genocide happening in Gaza that had rocked the entire world. Now Donald Trump's belief, and I want to emphasize, this is not just about Donald Trump. This is a bipartisan American position that both Democrats and Republicans share, that the Abraham Accords now can move forward because there allegedly now is peace in Gaza, and there's going to be a peace plan, and we don't need to worry about Gaza anymore. So that's really what the motivation is here. If you actually read Donald Trump's 20-point so-called peace plan for Gaza, it reads very much like the Abraham Accords. It's framed in that narrative. It's very much, I think, connected to this desire to somehow solve the question of Palestine so that Arab states and Israel can come together and proclaim peace in the region, and the ruling elites of both countries can make a lot of money. And then allegedly this will then allow Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and Indonesia and other Muslim countries to join the Abraham Accords, and everyone will live happily ever after. That's the vision, but of course it's a grossly distorted vision that has very little to do with the realities on the ground in Gaza.
Within Israel, there is little sign of reflection. Hardline leaders like Itamar Ben-Gvir call the ceasefire a national defeat, while others in Netanyahu's Likud party openly advocate for the complete annihilation of Gaza. In the Knesset, opposition leader Yair Lapid declared there was no genocide, no intentional starvation, calling protests around the world a result of propaganda.
The truth is, there was no genocide. To all those who demonstrated against Israel these past 2 years, on the streets of London and Rome, in Paris and in Columbia University. I do not represent the government. As you know, I am the leader of the opposition. And I tell you, then you were deceived. You were deceived. Propaganda experts, funded by terror money, manipulated you. Now that the war has stopped, you have time and a chance to go and learn the facts. The truth is, there was no genocide, no intentional starvation.
This denial is part of a broader push, both inside Israel and across Western capitals, to rehabilitate the country's image and re-establish the close alliances that had frayed under the weight of public outrage.
I don't see there being any internal reckoning anytime soon. In fact, if anything, the genocidal mentality is already growing stronger. The question is more a question for the world. Will the world take Israel at its word? Will it return to giving Israel the benefit of the doubt, or actually more like the full impunity that Israel has always enjoyed? I'd like to think that's not the case. I'd like to think that something significant has happened. The breadth and depth of the Israeli actions, of Israel's crimes, are such that the world will be forced to act, not even necessarily in an illegal or formal way, but although I do believe that's coming as well, but through social ostracization, through making Israelis feel unwelcome in various circumstances. I think that's happening, and it takes a lot of courage, but it already is happening. I wonder how long this will continue. I hope it will, because I think there is a large part of the world's population that feels that the Israeli genocide in Gaza is a major issue for the global order for decades to come. That this is a test case for who gets to do what in the future world. Do I think that the world listens to our protest? Again, it depends on who we're talking about. I think the world does listen. More and more people no longer accept Israel's word simply as the natural state of things. And you can take what's happening in Gaza right now as an example. The situation on the ground has been rapidly internationalized. I don't think there's really any going back from this rapid internationalization. I think what the major players, and that includes not just Donald Trump, but a united front of the Arab Gulf monarchies and other countries as well, including Palestine. What all these countries are telling Israel is that Israel no longer calls the shots. It's not to say that these countries are fully committed to the welfare of Palestinians. It's not to say that these countries have Palestinians' best interests in heart. In fact, it may be completely the other way around. It may be that these countries have their own interest in heart. But what's important is that their interest is not synonymous with the Israeli interest. Or the notion that Israel should simply have its way is no longer considered to be the default option, the definition of the good and proper. And I think that change has already occurred.
In Germany, Chancellor Friedrich Merz has said there's no reason for further protest now that a ceasefire exists. In Brussels, Israeli officials are urging the European Union to clear the table of sanctions and resume cooperation, even offering reconstruction contracts in Gaza as an incentive. Meanwhile, bans on Israel from UEFA and Eurovision, once considered likely, are now in doubt. The United States is leading the charge, calling the truce everlasting peace, despite continued attacks on famine inside Gaza.
We ended the war in Gaza and really, on a much bigger basis, created peace. And I think it's going to be a lasting peace, hopefully an everlasting peace.
During addresses in Tel Aviv, Israel on Saturday, President Donald Trump's son-in-law and former senior advisor Jared Kushner spoke about Israeli resistance and strength throughout the Israel-Hamas war up until this point. He said he was proud of how Israel and its people had carried themselves through this traumatic, horrific experience.
I couldn't be more proud to see the way that the state of Israel and its people have carried themselves through this traumatic, unthinkable, horrific experience. Instead of replicating the barbarism of the enemy, you chose to be exceptional.
You just saw the spectacle that was on display for the entire world last Monday at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, when Donald Trump proclaimed peace in the Middle East. There were many Western leaders that showed up there to basically provide a stamp of approval on his horrific peace plan for Gaza, which I have described, I think more accurately, as a genocide extortion plan for Gaza and a new attempt to impose a neo-colonial stranglehold on Palestine. I mean, Trump's plan, calls for effectively Western control over Gaza, with Tony Blair, the former prime minister, as the new viceroy of Gaza. And so these Western leaders show up at this summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, all of them, eager to get close to Donald Trump and to support his horrific so-called peace plan for Gaza. So they're very complicit. They're also deeply complicit because during the last 2 years, these countries have been providing Israel with solid support and ongoing arms sales while Israel is committing a genocide. Even Canada, for example, shows up at the Sharm el-Sheikh summit, issues press releases praising Donald Trump, suggesting that this new plan for Gaza is rooted in justice, is rooted in the prospects for peace, thus sanitizing what Donald Trump has done in Gaza and what he hopes to do in the future. But let me emphasize something else. This is not just Western leaders who are complicit in what's happened in Gaza. Muslim leaders are also deeply complicit in the horrors of Gaza. When Donald Trump announced his peace plan, 8 Muslim countries, including Pakistan, sang Donald Trump's praise. In fact, they issued a press release praising Donald Trump for, quote, his moral leadership and sincerity. And if you saw what happened at the Sharm el-Sheikh summit, one Muslim leader after another, including the Pakistani prime minister, was just, enthusiastically praising Donald Trump, who's not only an authoritarian leader, but who's deeply complicit in genocide. This is the man who has been backing and arming the state of Israel while it is committing genocide, who earlier this year announced a peace plan for Gaza that called for the mass expulsion of the Palestinians to Sudan, to Somaliland, perhaps to Libya and even Indonesia, so that he could build a Riviera in the Middle East on the graves of the Palestinian people in Gaza. And so instead of these Muslim leaders standing up to Donald Trump and insisting that he uphold international law and to roll Israel back to its international borders and to stop this genocide, they're doing the exact opposite. They're actually legitimizing Donald Trump's Gaza extortion plan. So I want to emphasize it's not just Western leaders here that are complicit in the horrors of Gaza and in this very odious peace plan. Muslim leaders are also deeply complicit. Exactly a week ago, the Washington Post reported that all of the leading Arab states have expanded their military relationship with Israel over the last 2 years when a genocide in Gaza has been taking place. Just stop and think about what future historians are going to say about this moment, that when the people of Gaza were being exterminated by the state of Israel in a horrific land grab motivated by the extremist policies of Benjamin Netanyahu, leading Arab states were strengthening and enhancing their military relationship with a country that was practicing genocide. That's what's happening today in the context of the war in Gaza. And this just confirms a position I've articulated several years ago, that the war in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, reminds us that we are actually living through the dark days of Muslim history.
Israel's image repair is not confined to politics. It extends to the digital world. Just hours after he was killed in Gaza, Meta permanently deleted the Instagram account of Palestinian journalist Saleh al-Jafarawi, who had 4.5 million followers. He had spent 2 years documenting Israel's bombardment and alleged war crimes. Meta justified the deletion under its dangerous organization's policy, the same rule it has repeatedly used to silence Palestinian content. Internal data shows the company complied with 94% of Israeli government takedown requests, removing or suppressing over 90,000 posts since the war began. Even archives like the Wayback Machine have wiped al-Jafarawi's work, effectively erasing both the men and the record of his reporting. And as the US government pushes TikTok's American operations toward Oracle, led by pro-Israel CEO Safra Katz, concerns are growing that digital control over Palestinian narratives will expand even further.
As someone from the digital rights sphere, and the way that we have seen in real time the conflict play out and the conversation around it, with respect to the role of platforms, how they have been complicit in silencing discourse and conversation. It started out with reports of shadow banning in the early days, and then we have heard, and there's extensive documentation, especially reports by Hamla, reporting the erasure of record, and that specifically pertains to those who are adding to the discourse, with whether it's somebody's going live, somebody's sharing pictures, there are references to the genocide, and everything that has happened post October 7th. And people have found that their accounts have been restricted, deleted, they can't go live. And this, of course, is erasure without notice, and it's very targeted. And this is happening in real time, where there's an ongoing genocide and people are speaking about it. They are trying to raise awareness, and also there is a war of narratives as well. But one side, of course, is prevailing over the other, and it's a sort of hegemonic space that the online space has become. And what happens is that, of course, today, the way that we consume news digitally, the visual that we've seen, the headline that we've read, and of course the news cycle just overtakes one day to another, hours in fact. And what happens in this is that when there is record that is deleted, for archival value that no longer exists, for even referencing when you're trying to have a conversation or pin responsibility, and that material in fact is not there or not recoverable, which we've seen happen very deliberately. This is then of course it's not just about what we consume, what we believe, what shapes our perceptions, but also what remains available for any kind of narrative accountability for the future.
What we are seeing now is not a peace process, it's peace washing. By using the language of reconciliation and reconstruction, Israel and its allies appear to be attempting to reset global perception without addressing the root causes: occupation, apartheid, and decades of systematic violence.
I think Israel has a political liability. I think the way in which Israel has identified itself with the worst of the hard right all over the world is such that it cannot be reversed. I think Israel has made its existence a partisan issue, not something that transcends politics as usual. And that was a major mistake, and I think Israel will be made to bear the consequences of that mistake.
And this is not the first time. After the Oslo Accords, the world applauded while settlement expansion and land grabs continued. Today, the same cycle is repeating, but with far more sophisticated tools: AI-driven censorship, Western diplomacy, and corporate compliance.
So now there's a battle of narratives. The narrative of Donald Trump and of the State of Israel and of Western countries and of those Muslim countries that have supported Donald Trump's peace plan is that, look, this war is over. Gaza now has a bright future. All it has to do is follow Donald Trump's peace plan. Hamas has to disarm. The corrupt Palestinian leaders in Ramallah need to come back and control Gaza. And, Tony Blair should, be the new viceroy of Gaza, and everything will be fine and dandy, and we don't need to worry about anything else. The challenge now going forward is to not let Western countries and Muslim ruling elites to write the narrative over what happened in Gaza over the last 2 years. They want to whitewash the genocide. They want to pretend it didn't happen. They want to make a lot of money by allying themselves with Israel and denying the Palestinians their basic human rights. So the challenge going forward is to ensure that the documentary and factual record of what happened in Gaza is preserved and passed on to future generations. That's why I say there's a battle of narratives. This is the work of human rights groups. This is the work of global civil society. This is the work of everyone on the planet who has an ethical core and who believes that international law matters and that the basic rights of indigenous populations should be protected and respected. We have to uphold international law, and critically, we have to demand accountability, not just for those people who have command and control responsibility over the genocide in Gaza, but also to those countries in the Western world and in the Islamic world who are complicit in this genocide.
The ceasefire may stop the bombs for now, but if the world forgets why they were falling in the first place, Israel's rehabilitation won't just rewrite history, it will erase it.